Okay, I'll stand up here so you can see me on Zoom. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Witches Meetup. Tonight we have Larry here talking about traditional witchcraft. And just as a reminder, please be sure to check out, we'll post up on our Facebook page and become a patron on our Patreon page. And for everyone here, if you want to give a love donation, we have a box for that to help set up the cost of the room. And I think that's all the announcements I have. So I will let Larry take it away, and I will try to be watching the chat on Zoom. Guys, it may take me a minute to see it. I'm kind of trying to not put my head in front of the camera when I do that. So FYI.
Okay. Yeah, so my name's Larry Phillips, and so we're talking tonight about traditional witchcraft and something that I call the witching trance. So I like when I do any class, to mix up the talk with doing something that's more interesting for you all as well as me. And so we'll kind of, go into aspects of traditional witchcraft and then this trance technique, how it fits within it. But first I'll give you a little bit of my background just to know where I'm coming from, because I think ultimately any one of us who practices anything in the occult arts, what we end up doing, is a synthesis of everything, that's come before. So we end up, having this, our practice becomes this mongrel mix. If we're lucky, I think that's the ideal, to be honest, versus adhering to a system, and being a purist. So I think one's background, kind of is important to know where they're coming from. So I got started in this, in the occult, back when I was 16, and that's quite some time ago. And and I began with this book, Paul Hewson's Mastering Witchcraft, which excellent book if you can find it, if you're into witchcraft. To me, it's a must-have. It was written, I think, in 1970 or 69, the year I was born. But it, strangely enough, it is an important book in traditional witchcraft. So I came a bit full circle. But so along the way from that point, and I worked with that book, when I was a teenager into my early 20s. And then in my 20s was very involved in a Wiccan tradition. And so I did that through the 90s. And then got a little tired of that, as we do. I think it's a natural thing, that we may hop a little bit, because sometimes things get stale. And then, and really in the late 90s and early 2000s, I kind of discovered what people were calling traditional witchcraft. And it struck me as the thing I'd always been looking for. And not to disparage any traditions or anything, but as a really young person, being interested in witchcraft, and then when you get into the late 1980s and 90s, Wiccan paganism, there's a bit of a whitewashing and making it palatable and acceptable to a larger group of people. But I felt like the intensity and the edge had come off of it. And that's not necessarily true of Wicca. In reality, it was just the popularized Wicca of the day. Because, when you get back to real Gardnerian or Alexandrian Wicca, it's got edges, it's got, and it's can be tough to distinguish from traditional witchcraft, and I'll get into that a bit on how, sometimes the wall between them, is a dotted line. It doesn't quite exist. But And so I got into that through, various works that I'll kind of talk about my sources just for purpose. If you don't, hadn't heard of them, they can be a direction of study. But, so I started working with that solo. And in the meantime, I also became a member of a ceremonial magic order, the Aurum Solis, which is less celebrated than the Golden Dawn, but same kind of thing. And although it's more based in the Greek and Egyptian mysteries, it's more pagan than the Golden Dawn. So we use Greek words of power versus Hebrew, very little Kabbalah. And meanwhile, kept my traditional witchcraft practice going. And then to kind of wrap up the bio, at some point, I guess about 7 years ago, I became involved with a traditional witchcraft author as far as working with him, not involved. But named Robin Artisan, who he's a self-published one, so you wouldn't necessarily have heard of him. And began working. The way I got involved is he saw my paintings and wanted me to paint a tarot deck for him. So I joined that coven, and then that further shaped my approach. And I won't go into this much, but we're no longer speaking. But he pulled a lot of interesting things into traditional witchcraft. They're all from other sources. None of us are. We're rarely birthing anything out of our own selves. We're grabbing things and making it work. But he pulled out a lot of different sources that gave me a metaphysics to put behind my witchcraft. And by that, I mean, what the unseen world is made up of and how it works. Because I always want to know that. So that would then guide how I do anything, how I could construct my own spell or ritual. So he had wonderful things, that he had really synthesized that I still, they're still part of my world. So at this point, I left that coven, and then now I think of what I'm doing as the synthesis of all that's come before. I like ceremonial stuff, in reasonable doses. Mainly because every time you do something, you don't want it to take 3 hours and 5 days beforehand to get all your stuff together. But and I think with every person, what we're doing, our book of shadows or our grimoire is never finished. It's always I finish one book and then I start rewriting it, under my new mindset. And so that's where I'm coming from, really. And as far as other inputs on what I do, the Greek magical papyri, which are that collection of spells from around probably about 2,000 years ago, more or less, of syncretic Egyptian, Greek, and other Mediterranean magic, is kind of a passion of mine to take those and adapt them, for my use. And so that's what, that's where I'm coming from with everything. So when we talk about traditional witchcraft, it's kind of difficult, really, because traditional witchcraft's really very diverse when you see the different versions of it being acted out by people. It's hard to find, there are some common threads or some that generally apply, but it's it's so diverse that sometimes traditional witchcraft means not Wicca to some people. And as I was alluding to beforehand, within kind of occult witchcraft communities, people will like argue that line, this is better, this is better. And but the more I look at it, the more I look at the two, uh, that line is very, very thin. Um, and they and and I really think if you, like I mentioned before, if you get into original Gardnerian work and Alexandrian tradition work, uh, it's so much like traditional witchcraft, really, that but we have to use a word so people know what we're talking about. So while I um, while the labels have problems to me, I still have to use them. Like for this talk, we called it traditional witchcraft so people have an idea. But it's really so diverse as far as practice, as far as belief, and in the lineages, um, that it's just a very umbrella kind of term. And so I will tend to, when I'm really describing what I do for real, um, I'll just tend to say witchcraft. um, but I'd say some of the differences, these don't hold for all versions of traditional witchcraft, I think. But a lot of differences would be that traditional witchcraft tends to put a stronger focus on pulling from folklore, um, either folkloric stories, uh, practices, magical or medicinal, and other folk ways. Often it's mostly confined to the Great Britain, but not really exclusively. They're people are pulling on threads from the Balkans and from the Eastern Europe and all over, um, and even people in our in the country we live in will pull from somewhat from native indigenous traditions, but I think we probably all know what a slippery slope that is, toward appropriating incorrectly. Um, but so folklore has a stronger presence in traditional witchcraft, although, Wicca obviously, you know, has that in it as well. And traditional witchcraft will often, but not always, tend to be of less religious in a sense. Um, I think the very popularized Wicca. See, I'm having to couch every single term that I use, but I know I can see the comprehension. So, um, but popularized Wicca will tend to, we're a religion. We're nice people, just like all of you. We don't hurt people. That whole thing. Um, and also, they've grown into, we have clergy, you know, um, building up religious structures, a little similar to conventional religious structures. Um, though it depends on which Wiccan you talk to. um, and uh, and then, like I mentioned before, for many, traditional witchcraft is witchcraft that's not Wicca. That's the one that's universal among traditional witchcraft, I would say. And then uh, traditional witchcraft will tend to employ I think there's certain aesthetics that run through it that I think probably uh, are the threads that are the strongest through this vast, grouping of practices. So the aesthetics will tend to be a little on the dark side, and on the rustic side. So, when you see, if you look um, on any social media, you'll notice the traditional witchcraft people um, because they have lots of skulls, lots of bones, um, lots of rustic looking. Their tools are a little rougher looking generally, um, and but the aesthetic component, it sounds like a trifling thing, the aesthetics, and granted, people can focus so much on aesthetics in the occult that there's little substance. If you see Instagram, you see a lot of that. Um, but the aesthetics are super important too, um, because as long as they have something behind them as well. But the aesthetics, is the art part of what we do. Um, that whatever it takes to enliven the imagination, get your emotional part of you engaged in what you're doing. Uh, that's the function that I see there, the importance. So uh, it just reminds me, like that one is kind of a razor's edge to walk. Um, but everything occult, the entire occult path is a razor's edge of like, okay, you can do some of this, but if you go too far, you're going to fall off the other side. Um, but I do think that aesthetic is one of the defining things where you can um, tell what is traditional witchcraft from Wicca. And then in traditional witchcraft, people will tend to focus, there can be more of a focus on their local land. So there's the term, the genius loci, the spirit of the place. So that with an individual practitioner or small group or covenant practitioners, um, that being will often take the forefront of their ritual practice. Um, and uh, often above any gods or deities. Um, so it's not true of all traditional witchcraft, but it's a fairly common theme or a common practice that there will be more. They'll often deal with the smaller spirits, um, the, the the spirit of this the land we're on, or the spirit of that river, that lake, that mountain, and so the practice will get focused there. And so, but bigger divinities do, play a part as well. Um, just like Wicca, uh, there will often be a the potencies, that what we often attribute as male or female, um, or people are fortunately finding other words too, because we understand those concepts differently now, and so there'll often be an idea of of an earth mother or mother goddess, and the god, the horned god, plays just as much a part. Although they'll tend to be referred to often by titles. So, they'll be known as the master and the dame, a lot of oldie timey kind of British things like that. And say in the traditional witchcraft group I came out of, we would tend to speak of the um, female potency. I'm going to do this in air quotes because as the mother of souls, or the cosmic soul, which goes back to some Neo-Platonists back in Greece, talking about the soul of the earth, the cosmic soul, and we thought of the horned god as master of the wind and storm. So that being, um, that massive spirit that indwells the wind and the sky. So then we have the two together. And so all will still have, those two, major beings, um, but still put more of a focus for actual magical practice on individual smaller spirits, um, ancestral spirits, for example, or the spirit of that tree, those rocks, um, or something else entirely, like some of the spirits from the various grimoires, such as the Key of Solomon, all of those things. Um, so, as you can see, like I had mentioned before, it's all exceedingly diverse. And some traditional witchcraft groups will employ some Christian elements as well. Um, the rationale being a valid one. I don't tend to go for it. I just don't like it. But the cunning men and cunning women of of days of old, you know, for healing, cursing, protection, this and that, would use such things as psalms and verses, and um, and of course they, at least as the stories go, they needed to keep up appearances and attend church as well, um, and so they wouldn't get killed, and so they would also, part of this may have been to speak in the spiritual language of the people they were serving, with healing, lifting of curses, and all of that. So some traditional witchcraft groups, will heavily use um, Christian names, um, calling upon the God of the Bible or Jesus or apostles, and things like that. And then, some use, uh, some will refer to their divinity as the devil. And of course, they don't mean the author of evil, you know, they mean something close to Pan. Um, and, uh, and I think there's an aesthetic element there too, because, what's more exciting to get the magical juices flowing than to use that word and that imagery, and it can be very effective, um, to describe um, who you're calling upon, and in that sense, they're often referring to a being that kind of embodies being an outcast, a being who is really part of the world around us, uh, and also, because they draw, many of them will draw on content from the witch trials. So, and in trying to piece together our own practice from, all the little bits we have around, because I don't really know of any unbroken line of continuity for witchcraft, you know, going back very far. Um, but that's a resource, you know, if depending on how you judge the validity of witch trial transcripts and confessions, which those have their problem too. Um, the main one being duress. um, who wrote it? Because some people were illiterate. You know, generally someone besides the person on trial wrote the narrative, and what questions were they asked? And and then did their yes or no turn into, you know, um, a long description. So leading the witness, as they say. So the Confessions of Isabel Gowdy, the Scottish witch, those are, I believe, those are the most comprehensive or the fullest kind of confession of a witch, uh, in terms of practices that you can find. So her confessions, of course, they influenced Wicca, because Margaret Murray, who in the, I believe, early 1900s or late 1800s, wrote The God of the Witches, Witch Cult in Western Europe. Um, Problematic scholarship, but an interesting read, but drew upon Isabel Gowdy's confessions to build her narrative of the witch cult that had been surviving for millennia. Um, and so those things got into Wicca as well, because Gerald Gardner, who's kind of thought of as the person who created Wicca, or at least brought it to the open, relied heavily on that. And then, but so as we talked about, these various elements, trying to distinguish, we realize those exist in both Wicca and traditional witchcraft. Some traditional witchcraft groups, when you look, if you read any of the books like This is Wicca, with a stang, a forked staff. So the stang, a staff that then ends, like that at the top, is one of those emblematic things of traditional witchcraft. And so often what I see being peddled is traditional witchcraft. It's a Wiccan ritual structure, Wiccan coven structure, everything, but they have a stang and maybe a skull. So, if you're down to the wire, just grab a forked staff and a skull, and then your Wicca can be traditional witchcraft. So it's, you can tell I'm a little, jaded about these things, and really in the occult, people spend so much energy, dividing up everything and with definitions, and when so many things just run together, in reality. So it's funny in trying to talk about this subject, I'm also deconstructing it a little bit at the same time, um, because in reality, they all run together on a spectrum, and um, and sometimes the terms are for a type of marketing, in a sense. Um, Either it's marketing of my ideas, to a few people, or marketing to sell stuff as well. Um, but like I said, I'll still say traditional witchcraft because people will hear that, kind of have an idea. So also within traditional witchcraft, there seems to be a little less emphasis on initiations. Some groups, all they might do is, if you join our group, take an oath of secrecy and, things like that to be part of what we're doing. Um, but often not initiations, as in the Wiccan sense, which more goes back to the mystery school initiation, to be a more transformative process. Um, but but then others do the full 3 initiations that are known in Wicca, and coven structure will tend to be different. Um, I think often less structure, less of an emphasis on the on 2 leaders, which in Wicca we'll tend to call high priest and high priestess, but some have them as well, or they have more officers of the coven. So it's really, the subject is so broad. One can only ever really talk about what they do within this and um, what they pull in. But so that's why I will tend to just say witchcraft if I'm really having a conversation and not get caught up in there's almost nothing you can say that ends up being absolutely true, because there's always an exception. So, um, so it's quite diverse, and but there are different sources, that kind of identify certain currents of traditional witchcraft, or currents, or if I'm being cynical, brands, I'll call them. But I think, the one we know of that goes back the furthest, at least in published form and in being known in the culture, would be from a man called Robert Cochrane, Cochrane. His real name was Roy Bowers, but he, in the, I think it would have been in the 50s and going into the 60s, um, he, had his own group going, and he had claimed some family tradition witchcraft, which I have a hard, whenever I hear that from people, I politely go along with it, and inside my mind, I'm like, no. But um, and that has continued his current. Um, Doreen Valiente, who was, one of Gardner's priestesses, she worked with him, with Robert Cochrane, for a while. Um, I think we were talking about her the other day, but she's such a great figure in witchcraft because she really, she was truly exploring and and experienced a lot of stuff, and um, and and I think of her as a good source for traditional witchcraft too, because gets uh, she gets into practice. She, just, I don't know what comes through in her writing, is a sincerity, I think, and um, and and not a desire for notoriety, but she was, I think, a true searcher, and and such a great writer. But Robert Cochrane's ways, reach into the present day. Um, he had, there were some offshoots along the way. If you ever see any references to 1734, it has to do with a riddle that he tended to employ riddles of sorts that were kind of like a Zen koan, something that bringing your mind to bear on the riddle and what it means was the point. Um, the answer was less important, but there was an offshoot of his ways by a man called Joe Wilson, called 1734, and and then and then from this man named Evan Jones, the clan of Tubal Cain, and Cain from the Bible. Um, at some point was kind of syncretized with another figure, kind of culture hero. I think more in the Eastern Europe or Russia area. I'm not sure. I can't remember exactly. Or Turkey, known as Tubal, and he was kind of a blacksmith character in some ways, and culture hero in a way. Um, and who was then punished for whatever he gave to mankind. So we know that story, or we've seen that before. Prometheus is an example. And so that comes through to the present day, um, and that tradition is now led by a woman called Shani Oates, Shani, and then Oates with an ES, as the clan of Tubal Cain. So she writes, quite a bit. It's fairly prolific, and um, rather deep writings. But what characterizes some of their ways. I think the one that stands out that has become a that has been picked up by a lot of practitioners of traditional witchcraft is their allotment of elements with the directions. So, we all know the east air, south fire, west water, north earth, but they would use air in the north, fire in the east, earth at south, and water west. That one stayed in place. So that's one thing you'll see that when you see that having trickled through, that's where that came from. It's an effective one. I like it. Plus, one of the biggest values of using that system of elements and directions is just that it's different, and sometimes that makes a difference, to take a step away, from what is widely used. So, and it goes quite well with the mindset of witchcraft too, But so I would say Robert Cochrane is probably the most significant influence of traditional witchcraft, I would say. Although there are other groups, I can't possibly name them all because I don't do a lot of occult forums online because they make me mad, I want to see people argue. There's, but there's a group called the Cultists Sabati, quite mysterious. The main thinkers or writers from them are a man named Andrew Chumbly and a man named Daniel Schultz. And mostly you can find their books up for resale on eBay for like minimum $700. It's crazy. So the resale market for their books, which were published in limited form, and then when people are tired of them, they're, I guess, rare enough that you'll see them for $1,500. It's crazy. But I've read those books. You can find PDFs, but it's very incomprehensible to me. All of that, I couldn't even possibly tell you what it's about. Except they're very great on creating the mystique, hence those prices. Although, say in what's available to us now, the one kind of proponent of traditional witchcraft that I really love, that really has put something workable out there, is a woman named Gemma Gary, who focuses on traditional Cornish witchcraft. So it's rustic, it's dark, it's got some folklore, elements in, and very, it's got a great witchy aesthetic. And her ways kind of follow the elements and directions of Robert Cochrane. But she's one I highly recommend. She's got a beautiful way of writing, beautiful aesthetic, and the information that comes out in their books is useful, and you can use it to practice it. And Gemma Gary, so Gemma, and then last name Gary. And I really, her stuff is great. She's got about 3 or 4 books out. And I mentioned Paul Hewson's Mastering Witchcraft before. So Mastering Witchcraft is quite celebrated among traditional witches. The irony being, a good portion of it comes from the Alexandrian Wicca Book of Shadows. But he, pulled in some elements from the grimoires. He pulled in some other things. And I think it's just that he presented it all as just witchcraft. there's nothing wrong with being a benign, peace-loving religion, but there's less of that. We just want what's good for everybody, and we're nice people kind of stuff, threaded through his work. Um, but some quite accomplished occultists and writers, you know, all point to his book as if you want to get started, that's one of the great primers for the witchcraft practice. And and it takes a lot. It takes a good bit of work to get through it and do it. Um, but it's really good stuff. And then my I guess former let's see, comrade in witchcraft, Robin Artisan is another. He self-publishes. Um, he's a bit of a internet firebrand, a little bit of an argument starter and a sustainer, kind of a. But there's good stuff in his writings, for sure. I almost hate to say it, but taken he's added some depth, towards not just practice, but a whole mindset and metaphysics.
What's the last name again?
Oh, Artisan, Artisson, which that's a nom de plume. Um, that was one of the witchcraft trials of Dame Alice Tyler or Kettler. Robin Artisan was the name of the demon spirit that came to her and had intercourse with her. As we all know how that happens. But so that's the source of his Robin's nom de plume. Um, and there's a book out called Besom, Stang, and Sword. I believe I even saw it downstairs. That's Traditional Witchcraft. It's kind of exploded at this point. There's so much written that you could pull from, and I haven't kept up with a lot of it. But coming from different perspectives, as you read it, you'll see, okay, this is Wicca with a twist, Wicca with the stang, or Wicca with one thing changed. But in the end, my opinion is the genres don't matter so much. If you're adhering, if you're trying to stay within the box that's has the name of what you want to do, it's confining. And so personally, my guidepost for everything is, does it work? And then if it does, it's good as far as I'm concerned. And so I try to use that. But it's as one's trying to pursue this kind of thing, the various books and resources are good to follow. And then, of course, one has to just find their own way through it. You ultimately make your own path that doesn't need anyone else's permission. And it's tricky, because I've done various classes on witchcraft and things. And so I'm threading through all this, talking about like how to approach this, how to approach that, with things like, you know, don't accept authorities, bearing upon your practice. Don't even accept what I say if you don't like it. Um, that I strongly believe, as a witch, we're the last people that should be bowing before authorities, either external or within our own subculture. So it's the last thing I ever want to do again. And I've made that mistake plenty of times. And I hope I won't from now on. So it does come down to, kind of freeing yourself from the opinions of authorities and, and the opinions of people who write books or speak at classes. And but it's tough because pursuing occult work is it's hard to know where you're going. There's a lot of uncertainty, and, and it's human nature that we look to for permission, like, oh, I do it this way. Is that okay? And if someone says yeah, then you're golden, but then you're hooked. So the main thread I try to put through everything is like, um, be as fiercely independent. Of course, if someone has great things to say and you agree with it, that's wonderful to take all of that in. Not just be a contrarian, for 24/7. But I do think the occult world, for all of its idea of being the ultimate free thinkers, the vast majority have lined up under authority figures and instructors. So the irony is super thick. and um, and at the same time, while I say this, I've known many Wiccan priests and priestesses, leaders of things that are fabulous, good people who help their people grow. So they are there too. Um, but I'm say a rebel by heart, and and so when it comes down to it, I think of witchcraft as having this rebellious streak running through it quite strongly. So, any questions at this point?
Spelling. General?
Oh yeah, G
G-E-N-A.
yeah, and then the last name is Gary.
G.
G-A.
Okay.
I've muffled through this now. R and Y.
Oh, Gary. Gary.
Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah. So I think probably in a couple minutes we'll do a little break. Do you usually do 10 or 5?
5 is fine.
5. So
If we do one, it's sometimes.
in about 5 minutes we'll do a 5-minute break to give you all a mental break. So it's tough to talk about traditional witchcraft as a whole. And I think mostly what comes from it is, getting some good conversation started as far as, um, what people do and what they're into in witchcraft. But it's just so exceedingly diverse, which kind of defines it. And of course, Wicca is not monolithic anymore. Um, you can't talk about one without the other. But Wicca began as kind of a single thing, practices following the Book of Shadows. And then, of course, now it's even more diverse, I'd say, than traditional witchcraft. People have taken it in great directions. Some have taken it in not great directions. And it's become more of in some sectors, it's become more humanist religion than occult practice in some places, while other traditions have held the line. Um, so it's just as, if not more, diverse. So, yeah, and I do ritual work with a lot of people who identify as Wiccan. And truly, I think when you get into religion and occult practice, um, identification is the key. There aren't great hard definitions. There's not a universal definition of religion. I mean, Webster's will have one, but when you're going deep into a subject, you're not going to go to Webster's dictionary or a dictionary at all. I had my master's in religious studies. That was the first thing we learned. They've never been able to find an accepted universal definition of religion. So it's like what Larry Flynn or someone said about porn. I know it when I see it. And, um, and I like to relate those two things together. But um,
I did have someone asking about the trance part of things
Oh.
on here.
yeah,
I think they're interested in wanting to do the trance part of things.
oh yeah,
But I don't know.
that'll be right after our break.
Okay,
too.
cool.
So I'll kind of introduce that in the couple minutes we have till the break. So, like I said at the beginning, you know, when I do any class, I like for it to have an experiential component because I'm the worst person to sit and listen to someone else talk. Um, you know, I go to sleep super fast. And this particular technique, to me, is the most valuable magical occult technique I've ever learned. And it's become the key to everything I do. So I'm really building it up big here. So, um, and you know, it's like all these other things, it's not universal throughout traditional witchcraft. I did first come upon this through my work with Robin Artisan. It was drawn mostly from the work of a man named Peter Kingsley, who kind of he's a Joseph Campbell type of writer. I think he's passed away now, but he writes compellingly about the ancient world and mysticism and finding the core mysticism of the Western world. And a great writer to check out, Peter Kingsley. And so Robin got this technique, pieces of it, from this man. And which actually, this gets me to another thing that characterizes traditional witchcraft. It will tend to have this focus that is chthonic, meaning of the earth and the underworld. So that for many in that type of witchcraft, it is the underworld where the deities and everyone resides. So there's the surface world and the underworld. The underworld is the other world or the unseen world. So what's important about this technique is that's where you're going in the trance, is into the underworld. And I think that focus, you know, goes through traditional witchcraft quite a bit. So what we'll do is when we get back from break, I'll lead you into that state. And I can never tell how long it's going to take, but, you know, roughly 15 to 20 minutes or maybe a half hour. If I get myself in deep trance, time will become a non-entity. And I mean, 5 hours won't pass or anything, but might be 10 minutes longer than I think it is. And so we'll go into that, and there's a bit of a part of the induction to it is a little hypnotic. All of the trance stuff we use in occultism employs some hypnotic means, so I won't be taking over anyone's mind as if, but and then we'll go into that during the trance. You know, I'll still kind of, while we're in that state, talk about what you do with it, and then we'll come out and talk some more. So yeah, we can do a 5-minute break and then come back. That first hour went fast.
Yeah, very good.
It always goes fast when I'm talking. If I'm listening, it's dreadfully slow.
I hope everyone's doing okay in Zoom too.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, kind of. There's so little happening. You know, this
Yeah.
way.
Is there not very much happening?
Not that I can tell, you know, I've been involved in Village Witch for 2 years as one owners, and we.
There's a
I
lot going
shouldn't say
on
that
still
too
there.
loud. Yeah, it's kind of individual. Like, I think it's the same, but, I know they must be there, but they must because people get fired.
Yeah. Yeah, unfortunately, all of the really good company groups do seem to be very quiet. And I can't blame them because I work in a metaphysical store and I know that people who come in and like, I'm looking for a group, and they're just, you're like, you're a little unhinged, maybe. I'm not sure I want to work with you actually. But
Yeah, and I've been in Lawrence 28 years. And
nothing.
yeah, and I'm not very social, so that's probably part of it.
Fair.
I got to go out. Yeah, I haven't, you know, found many people. Sometimes I'll practice with the other people. But,
There is definitely activity.
yeah.
At least more people trying to be open. Emily here.
Mhm.
Trying to have meets and provide something for everybody to connect with.
Yeah, sometimes.
Yeah, it's a good thing to have. Because even though I'm fairly content practicing on my own, you still, you know, miss working with people and making great, you
Yeah.
know, having a great experience. And we were talking earlier, I'm not great with festivals because I'm maybe too much of an introvert, or I'm not a big
And they do tend to swing into party
yeah,
too often, in my opinion.
yeah.
I agree.
And I'm more and more irritable in my old age. You know, so last time I went to festival, shut up.
I know a lot of people who can't hack the camping anymore either.
Yeah.
They're just like, yeah, I'm pretty worn out of camping. I'm done with that. So
So that plays a part too.
yeah.
I went to a hotel, Paganic-Con a couple years ago, but it was in a hotel and it was awesome.
Yeah.
Great workshops, great presenters,
Which I wish we had
real
something
bed,
like that here.
air conditioning,
Yeah.
or heat. It was in March. It was cold. It was Minneapolis.
Yeah,
You know.
I just don't like being dirty for, you know.
Yeah, showers. That's another thing.
Yeah,
Real showers.
there's a limit. to
Indoor
my
plumbing.
dirtiness.
Are you not a camper? That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, we were saying festivals are not everybody's cup of tea.
No,
Be a lot of partying, camping can be rough.
I love the camp. but Every time I camp at thunderstorms.
It's fun. I like camping. It just
Not a fan, huh?
there's a limit.
It's not everyone's cup of tea.
So there's a line there.
Yeah.
I've been doing, you know, solo camping nights out of kayak.
Yeah.
And I like that. Of course, I have an inflatable mattress that's that high. You know,
See, I need a taller one. That would help me.
it makes all the difference in the world when you can get in and out of bed pretty much regular.
Yeah. You're not struggling to stand up from the floor.
Yeah,
I'm
because
doing this
trying,
and still with
especially
football.
like I'm in my 50s, and so at this point, trying to get out of one of those is like 5 minutes, and I have to think through it.
Yeah, I'm the same way.
I did like the reverse. When I was younger, I used to have the
Fair
big
enough.
flop
Fair
mattress.
enough. Well, in my
Now I even
festival,
did
it's
some
fast and
sand and
simple, and
I'm
someone
doing
can
the
accept it. So
hammock thing with the little, even in the rain.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if
Minimal,
it's true.
yeah.
small
I
boundaries.
think I want a cot and a bigger tent.
I think I'm really comfortable. I saw some
It
people.
It seems like something that would be, I don't have to worry about inflating it. And I'm not crawling around on the floor trying to stand up and it's like, okay, knees, got foot here, I have nothing to hold on to. And you get to head that and like it will something else to hold on to. So I do get to have to get out of before I can see what it is.
People really are liking those little trailers too. The little pop-ups that people find. Because it's all enclosed. They have like little beds in there. They look really fantastic. You know
Oh,
what I
this is
mean?
weird. Oh, I haven't done this in ages.
We had a puppet trailer when I was a kid. And it was, we stopped using it. We didn't use it that often. Like, we used it a few times when I was little, and I don't remember it much after that. They got rid of it, but. Yeah.
Yeah, it's with all the.
Well, I think people think they're safer too. And like going into the house and stuff.
Yeah, well, and in a sense, like,
That's fair.
out of Gaia, I'm not worried.
Good to have a little break.
But other places, it's.
Oh. I would attention first.
Okay, so we're back and so this is the portion where in a few minutes we'll lead everyone into this trance state. And so some important things to know going into it are, I guess you could speak of this as I've heard some people speak of it as a somatic trance. We're going to use some sensations of the body and the senses to get us there. So it can seem a little different than a lot of meditation or trance, where the goal is to disconnect from sensory inputs. But in this, we're keeping those. And there's some real advantages to this because have you ever tried to fully disconnect, from all of that sitting when you feel a little twinge in your back from the other day and all of those things? So this has the advantage of any input or a slight ache or a background noise, you use it all into the trance. And also, it also kind of goes along with an ideal of that the physical body and the earth, is as important as the unseen. So, a predominant idea in Western religion, is kind of founded upon separation of the spiritual and material world, with the spiritual being superior. But I think it can be said of witchcraft, Wicca, or traditional witchcraft, that there is more of an ethos of the physical body, the world, the beings of the physical world being of equal value. And in fact, everything's really meshed together and indistinguishable. But we use those words, so we can communicate it. So we use the physical body and its sensations in getting into this trance and maintaining it. And in fact, physical sensations are the triggers, which, is quite well known when you get into things like hypnosis and such things. And then as I talk through it, trance is really only one aspect of the state of mind. And so I call it a trance for convenience. You can get into quite a deep trance. But as we go through it to varying levels, I'll talk as we're in it about the various stages along the spectrum that you can utilize. One is that you can even be driving, because you can do this to a light level, eyes open, senses fully engaged, mind fully engaged. But what you've done is merged your senses into one, what I think of as the true sixth sense. And when you're doing something like driving, it just means you're more fully aware than you were when you were doing it normal. But you can also do this and go super deep and to a state of shamanic underworld journey. So that part you don't do while you're driving for legal reasons, we should state.
Please.
Yeah. But a big part of this too is that within yourself achieving this state, you're that gateway or that crossroads into the unseen world. So you're transforming yourself, through these states, and as a result, it becomes, to one degree of use of the technique or another, part of all your magical work. So it's very broad in its application, just depending on how deep you go. So what we'll do is we'll get started, and it's good to get comfortable, although your comfort level does not have to be perfect. Um, whatever feels about the best you can get to. And for learning this and for deep trance work, it's good to close your eyes. And that kind of allows you to feel more of your body. And then we'll take a few deep breaths. And as you're feeling how your body feels, you might have some aches, you might have some stiffness. Go ahead and fully feel that. Let that become part of your experience, and it won't detract from your experience. You can see the air conditioning sound that we hear, that's part of it as well. So you don't have to shut it out, because in this way of sensing and seeing, we're taking in the entire world. We're not cutting ourselves off from it at all. So as you take a couple more deep breaths, and then focus on the muscles around your eyes, and let them relax. So all the muscles that would move your eyes, let them relax more and more, to where you would have to make a concerted effort to open your eyes. But feel every muscle around your eyes relaxing and going slack. And then let that relaxation radiate from your eyes over your entire body. Feel it as a wave. It's a wave that passes through your head and down your neck, down your arms and torso, and your hips, and down your legs to your feet. Let that relaxation sink in. And this is just the beginning, where we quiet our minds. And we get our bodies to a place that feel good and relaxed. So our minds and our senses can be more aware. So the sounds that you're hearing, take those in. You don't need to shut those out. They're part of our world. And then the temperature of the air around you, feel that, whether it feels cool or warm. And feel your entire body as it touches the external world. And so you'll feel the weight of yourself against the chair. You'll feel the weight of your feet against the floor and the gravity that pulls on you. We'll take this all in, and it remains part of our awareness. And so think about how your body feels, how the weight of your body feels, and the temperature, and how your arms or hands feel against what they're resting on. And really get in there. Full awareness on your body. Because the body and the soul and the spirit, in truth, are indistinguishable. Your body, as you have it now, is really your soul. It's your soul and other powers and other materials all come together, interacting at this instant, which is you. And so now, as you feel your body, you can notice that there's two distinct areas in your body that you can sense. And one area is where your hips and your legs meet the chair you're sitting in, where your body meets the chair. That area feels dark and warm and compressed. And also where your feet are touching the floor, at that edge where your body ends and the floor begins, that also feels dark and warm and compressed. And feel those areas. The other sensation we have in our body is where your body meets the air, like your arms and your hands, where you end and the air begins. That area feels cool and light. But take some time feeling that area, the air on your face, the air on the tops of your arms. And again, let's go back to the dark, warm, and compressed areas, where your hips and your legs meet the chair, where your feet meet the floor. That sensation which is dark and warm. And on that edge of your body, where you end and the rest of the world begins, you feel a subtle vibrating or buzzing, an energy field between you and the chair, between your feet and the floor. So as you search for this sensation, it's important to not try very hard. Finding this sensation only needs about 40% effort. If you try very hard, you will fail. But if you open yourself to that feeling and feel the vibrating, the buzzing feeling, where your feet are meeting the floor, where your hips and legs meet the chair, it is there. You're already feeling it, and you've always felt it. Feel that feeling. And now, this is more subtle, but if you go to the areas of your body that directly touch the air, like the top of your arms, where you end and the air begins, you can also feel a vibrating or a buzzing. It's a little more subtle than the vibrating in the darker, compressed, warmer areas, but it's there. And if you feel your body in its entirety, on all your edges, whether it be in the dark, warm, compressed areas, or the cooler, lighter areas, you're enclosed in a field of this sensation. Every part of your body. Feel that vibrating and buzzing all around you, encasing your entire body. So some, they take this feeling and see it as this is what our soul feels like. This is the feeling of that energy that indwells our bodies. And we've never stopped feeling it. But what we're doing now is being aware of what we've always felt. So this way of sensing is said to be very, very old. It is said by some to be the oldest mystical technique of the ancient world. And it is said to be the technique where people would go to temples for healing and undergo an incubation. And immerse their consciousness into their body fully. Because our way is different. We don't turn away from the senses. We don't turn away from our body. Witchcraft is in the body. And so now that you feel yourself encased in this buzzing and vibrating all around you, you can think of this field of sensation Think of it as a container, like an urn, or a jar, or a cup. And within that vessel is water. And that water is your soul. And so feel yourself as this vessel, and as the water within the vessel. Take your awareness to the water, down into the water, which goes down far, far beneath the edges of the vessel. And go down with it. It connects downward infinitely through the floor, into the earth, downward, lower and lower, infinitely, until it touches the underworld and the ocean of soul that is the Great Mother. She who brings forth everything that exists. This ocean of soul is where our soul came from. And so feel yourself sinking down through this water, slowly and naturally. You don't need to force the sinking. You'll find that you naturally incline to sink lower and lower as you let yourself, just by small degrees. You're sinking through the floor, down into the earth, in just a bit. And again, don't try too hard. Don't try hard at all. Just let it happen. What you're doing is going deeper and deeper into the fabric of our reality. What you're doing is you're using all your senses, your hearing, your sense of touch, your sense of temperature, feeling of the gravity bearing upon your body. You're perceiving with all your senses, but you're perceiving from a deeper, deeper place. So as you let yourself sink and drift, just let it be gentle. And so this is a way of sensing that you can do for many purposes. You can just sink a little bit and be 100% engaged with the world. That you're contacting your deeper awareness of the world. And this feeling that comes along with the joining of all your senses could be said to be the true sixth sense that joins everything you feel together and the soul awareness that you have. You can use this state and go deeper when you're in need of healing. Go into this state, sink down and down until you join with the ocean of souls, the Great Mother in the underworld. She who brings forth the waters of life. And you can take your physical illness or your sadness down with you into that place, to the dark, dark ocean of soul, and be renewed. And you can use this also to contact the souls of your beloved dead. So if you sink down, as we've all done, focusing on the image of a departed loved one, you can then meet with them in the underworld. And this could be said to be perhaps the oldest form of necromancy, where you will touch them and you'll be in contact with them in that dream language that we use in the unseen world. Because thoughts and messages don't pass between souls in the same way they do in the surface world. It's much like the language of dreaming and of images and feelings. You'll find in this state that you can sense a lot more around you than you could before. So in this state of mind, if you aroused yourself enough to perform a ritual or spell, you keep this gateway to the underworld open within you. And when you speak the words of ritual or invocation or spell, you're directing your speaking down through yourself into the underworld, for your words to be heard and your actions to be witnessed by the infinite variety of beings in the unseen, even to be heard and witnessed by the Great Mother herself, by your ancestors. This technique to direct your words, know that they're passing through you down into the underworld through your connection that you've established, makes your words and actions infinitely more powerful. And when you open this gateway within yourself, you also bring within your body your spiritual presence to its fullest. So your words and your actions will be more powerful up here, bringing with them the full force of the unseen world. So we'll stay in this state a little bit longer. You could also, from this point, if you wanted to, you can journey the underworld. Sometimes you imagine a cave or a crevice in the ground, and you go down into that farther and farther and farther until you come out in a landscape. encounter other spirits and powers. And now, and when you're ready, coming out of this quite easy, because you never left your senses, you never left your body. And so when you're ready, you can open your eyes and come back fully into the room. You might feel yourself rise in your sensation. And then with your eyes open, you're back. But you still feel the connection inside. So, you may have, used techniques that employ some similar things like this, because none of the ways we do this are terribly unusual. But I think, what's important is the physical body sensation, and that we keep it. We're expanding our awareness into the totality of what we can sense, body, physical world, and soul, and other worlds. And it brings it all together. And it goes very well with what I think the witch is. The witch stands between the material world and the other world. We are never fully in one or the other, and our power comes from being in both places. And so the crossroads is an incredibly powerful symbol of that place, a point where places meet. And so during the trance, I tried to, speak through a lot of that to let it, go deeper in everybody about the uses of this, the ways I've used it, my friends have used it, the deep healing incubation, or the light. I'm going to fully engage with the world, coming together of senses that you can use when you're driving, because you're seeing everything, you're thinking through everything. It works quite well. On to, shamanic journeying, which is where some of your body awareness will depart. So there's such a range there. But the keys to this technique, I've had many people badger me to record it, because apparently I have a soothing voice, but I've resisted it because each person, it's important you find your way into it, of, using those triggers. First relaxation is with all these things, but the sensory triggers of feeling the buzzing, vibrating, where your legs meet the chair, where it's warm. That's where you can first feel that most easily, and then to expand that through your entire body, so where you're encased in that sensation. And then the important part is the letting yourself sink. And it's amazing what employing that feeling of sinking will do to your consciousness. Of course, it's not literally down, but we go deeper in. And from the perspective of doing magical work, that's the place you want to be. And I'll often see or think of it as I'm halfway sunk into the earth. A bit of me's in the surface world, and a bit of me is in the other. And where all those, where you come in contact with all the various spirits and powers. So, any questions or comments on how that felt, or did it work for you, or?
I think I do. I've done that before. I have practiced. It's easier like when that I feel like safe and alone, like without other people. It was harder to do it here.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I recognize it from what I have done at home.
Yeah, I think so many aspects are just part of our instinct, you know. That's where we naturally will feel, our soul, sink down deeper, into reality.
I thought it was really hard for me, and that's possibly because I have a lot of unlearning to do. I've done a lot of trance work, and it's never been body focused.
Oh.
So it's very the opposite direction of trance work I usually do.
Oh.
That's hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those things that I never had good luck before with trance work until I could use my bodily sensation. I just never very good. There was always something going on that I could feel. But this one made all the difference for me. And of course, ultimately, the maxim that I use for anything we do is whatever works, is justified by its working. So, but we've in doing witchcraft ritual, we'll often employ this in different ways. I hosted a full moon this past weekend, and so, this comes to another traditional witchcraft versus Wicca thing, but not really. Is that to cast our circle, we went widdershins or moonwise, and in some traditional witchcraft groups, that's the direction they'll go, because it's a bit of deconstructing of reality to get into, the place in between. That's the thought behind it. And so as we cast the circle, we walked the circle, feeling ourselves sink into the landscape. And so that's a similar kind of thing. And then that's when the moon became an eye, and everything was, shimmering. And if you stare at the moon long enough, you'll have some great experiences, which are entirely valid. Because, I would say from the witchcraft point of view, you could say you've tricked yourself into optical illusion or whatever. But since our bodies and our senses are part of witchcraft, it's all good. It's not fake because it was induced, by known mechanisms. So and I took some other people through this ritual, this full moon. We noticed when we came out of the circle, we went clockwise, the direction of the sun in the material world. And then the moon stopped being an eye. So there's a lot of ways of employing this or other trance states in ritual, while you're even walking, performing actions, being engaged with the steps you need to do, light trance, and with that awareness of, a core of yourself, touching the other world, the underworld, or whatever you would call it, the spiritual reality. It all goes together and empowers what you do and heightens, your sense of other people's energy and everything. It just is so key. And I think probably anyone who's been in, Wiccan or witchcraft circles and rituals, have you experienced where everyone gets together, they start doing it, and we've all just stayed in normal, ordinary consciousness? Sometimes because some people wouldn't shut up, or they wouldn't stop talking like, oh, my back hurts, or did you hear what she called me? Or, I've been in so many circles like this where you don't want to be that hard ass, but you also need them, but so that's another reason why I'll lead people into this before ritual, because it quiets us all down and separates, our ritual from what we were doing 5 minutes ago. And I often think before doing magical work, the best thing one can do is sit quietly for about 20 minutes, not even do any meditations, but just like chill out, so that you don't go from cleaning the dishes to now I'm doing ritual procedure. And it's the part I skip the most, to be honest, even though I know the immense value of it. But, when you're in that, if you're like this go-getter task list person, which I am, and I have to fight that tendency, so that, but I know, and so I'm better about it than I used to, but I'll just sit, not do anything special meditatively, but give myself 20 minutes just for everything to like reach a nice level. And it's a lot of the same purpose of doing a purification bath before ritual. Is it just helps you get out of the normal before you
Shifts your mindset.
yeah.
Is in your experience, does it get easier as you practice it, as you put it down?
Yeah, and I think what's key too is that, say, when I guide people into it, I have certain imagery, but you'll find your own in time, and then it becomes super powerful. An example of that is when I learned this, the sensory triggers were all about the vibrating and buzzing. But the sensory piece that came to mind for me that I, popped into my head or something was the seeing oneself as a vessel, and your soul is the water in the vessel. When you sense down into the water, it just goes forever down to the underworld. So that was the me trigger that made it really work. So I added it in. So
there's a meditation that I used to do, like it was a guided meditation online, and they have you sit really still and relax and stuff. But the guided meditation, after you like breathe into like all your aches and pains and the different body parts, is to envision like this golden liquid coming in like your head and slowly filling up your whole body, and then going out the places to touch the like, core or whatever, to envision it like your legs and your feet and stuff, and envision it going all the way down into the earth and just continuing like forever, and while you're still getting filled with the on the
Oh,
liquid.
nice, yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot like what you're talking about.
Yeah,
And you're still really aware, like of your body. You're very aware of your body because you're not just imagining, but like feeling yourself fill up with that liquid in it slowly. And it was just a really cool. Just reminded me of what you're saying, that because you're aware, you're really aware of it the whole time. I think she has you. It's a woman that does it. She has you first imagine as you're sitting there, like that the inside of you is like empty space, like it's filled up with air first,
oh,
and then she gets through like golden liquid.
yeah, I think, yeah, it's always good, when there's these continuity between techniques that work. And I do think what's key for me, what makes this one work for me is the syncing. That just is everything. And then as you learn it anymore, I go straight to the syncing, because the other parts have gotten internalized. And so there's something about the syncing of going into
That's what's so hard.
yeah.
I have
And then,
a question on here. It says, do you often journey without tethering?
without they having like an anchor.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, I pretty much always do, because I know I'll come back. Um, and in fact, for me, it's hard for me, to do any trance things. I think these are good issues to mention because, when somebody's either teaching a class or presenting something, you know, uh, everyone's always the best of the best, no one has any problems. But so for me, getting into trance and journeying is never easy. And so um, my challenge would be getting in there, I can snap back to myself. Um, just my mentality is very uh, practical, world focused. So it's harder for me to get into the dreamy places. So
I'm the same way,
yeah.
personally, yeah.
Um, but I think this is one of those subjects I'll go on and on about, but I won't tonight. But I do think it's when we're doing magical and occult work, very few people ever admit to their failures or that it's tough to get the big experience. But it really is, because we live in a world where we have to drive and look at signs and, do all these things that are just the opposite of that mystical awareness. And when people don't know that it's difficult and that we fail at it, it makes them think that they can't do it. That, that some of us are just doing it automatically, and then the person, who's going, oh, what's my problem then? Everyone's having a great time doing this great things on their first try. Um, so that's one reason why I think it's important to talk about how difficult trance can be, or doing an underworld journey. And for me, it takes some real doing. I know people for whom it's much easier and more automatic, but I really have to do all the steps. And I could even do them sometimes and try to do it and then go, nope, nothing's going on here. Like, so um, it's good to say, or for people to talk about, that. Or when you do a spell or working and the thing you did it for doesn't happen, like, well, something didn't go right, or else the forces, in the world making things as they are were too strong for me. But to me, if you can fail at it, it's real. If you're always successful, there's some doubt that it has reality. So To me, that's an empowering thing to kind of share, because every single one of us, will try a spell, try any meditative or trance work and fail miserably because, we're really trying and we're human and we're in reality.
I wonder if when you were like guiding us through that, like when you said like don't try too hard, like just like 40%, it feels like my mind tries to like pull back. I don't know how to, like, it feels like when I try to let go of that, I could feel the tingling and stuff better.
Yeah.
But it was like a struggle. Then like when I guess it's trying too hard again, and like it was a back and forth thing.
Yeah.
It was really hard.
Yeah, with this or with any other thing, you kind of practice at it, and slowly train your mind to like let it happen, and it won't be all at once,
Right.
because anything like that, you kind of have to talk to yourself a little bit, and over time, that deeper part of yourself will hear it all.
That's good to
And,
know.
yeah, because it takes me great effort, to get into anything trancy or anything like that.
For me, it is different from being in reality. Do you ever? Well, I mean, do you know people? Do they use the same technique? Some people will use substances and stuff as part of their practice. Do they use this technique, or have you known people use the same technique and substances, depending on what they're going for?
Yeah, I do know some people who do. Um, if they use a substance, it'll tend to be a botanical, and they're engaging with the spirit of that plant, um, and they use this, same technique to start with. Um, I don't tend to, just because I'm old and I can't handle substances anymore, and so um, like I'm always thinking about what I have to do the next day. But
Even there's oils and stuff that are supposedly like joining oils that aren't, they're not like extreme substances,
Yeah.
but the smell and the texture and stuff like that helps. Well, at least it helps me to
Yeah.
sort of get in that way.
like a little mugwort tea would be great at enhancing your visuals.
Right.
So I'll do that. But with that one, it has to be a seldom thing or it will lose its, effectiveness for you.
Right,
So, but sometimes that'll be good.
So you do combine them. You just use, like one more time, exactly mild, but it's not like a boosting. It's not strong.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good to know.
And it'll be a pretty weak tea of mugwort, just because I try to do a very light touch. And I don't want to, blow my brains out with any entheogens or anything, but I admire the people who have the courage to do so, but every time I think of it, I'm like, no, not for me.
You should stay right here in
Yeah.
reality.
I'm going to be fine with my limited ability to do these things. Yeah, we're almost near our time, but yeah, I hope you found it interesting or helpful. Um, like I said, there's, not a lot one can say about traditional witchcraft, which is absolutely true. But to me, I think its value, is that it is in a way a breaking away from conventional occultism in some ways, or it kind of began as breaking away from, what was predominant, and really the field's entirely open, to take what you think's powerful and if it works, you keep it, and if it doesn't, you try again a few times and then see what happens.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
Yeah,
I'm
thank you
going
all.
to stop the Zoom. Thank you, everyone on Zoom. And I'm gonna turn this off now.